I'm not going to bore you with the studies that are out there about the benefits of meditation practice. A simple Google search will yield that for you. I mean, this stuff is no longer speculative as to the benefits of practice, physically, mentally, emotionally. Um, it's at the point now in the modern era where there's so much science. I mean, mindfulness and meditation has become so um, popular in science right now that there are so many studies, peer-reviewed, authentic studies, that if you're not practicing, it's like, why not? You know, this is these practices, they've stood the test of time and they work. And now we're at a very unique point where they're being um, refined by modern science. So many of you know me. Um, I've been practicing meditation with some diligence for about 10 years. I've been teaching for maybe 5 years, more so now than ever. Um, for me, the reason I got into meditation practice was partly because even as a youngster, I had an authentic uh, interest in stillness. I can remember even as a young boy, just like sitting in nature and just imagining that I could disappear. But honestly, that faded, that interest faded in adolescence and young adulthood. And the real reason that I got into meditation practice um, is because I was just really struggling. My inner world was difficult to manage. My mind was not my friend. I continually was getting into trouble and finding it difficult to avoid afflictive behaviors, alcohol, fighting. For me, the practice was really kind of like a last ditch effort. Like, wow, things are pretty rough. Maybe this will help. And as I understand it, I think a lot of people come to the practice from that place. Um, I have a teacher who describes most people who really come to meditation practice with diligence, and who really cultivate a deep practice come from the two extreme ends of the spectrum. At one end are people who are really struggling and can't seem to get in the game. Life is very difficult. Life is challenging. The emotional world is difficult to be with. And then at the other end are people who they seem to have it all figured out. Um, they're successful. If you were to look at their lives externally, it's as if they've made it. They did everything they set out to do, but they're left still with this, ah, this can't be it. There must be more to it than this. So typically, deep practitioners come from those two ends of the spectrum. Personally, I came from having a really hard time in life, end of the spectrum. But now I think we're finding the people in the middle of the road are really becoming fascinated with this practice because, as I'm sure you all know, it's out there. Meditation is out there. It's like yoga was in the 90s. Everyone's interested in it, which is good because I really feel that the more people approach this practice with real diligence and discipline, the better the world becomes. I mean, I really do feel that. And that's why it's very important to me to share this practice with as many people as I can. Um, so, like I said, I've been practicing for about a decade. In my exploration, I came upon a few teachers. It is important, I think, to have a relationship with a teacher if you want to approach this path, because it's a very valuable relationship in that a teacher can see, prevent you from making mistakes, and guide you in the right direction. Some teachers I came upon just totally weren't for me, and one of them that I found is named Shinzen Young. It's his kind of system that we're going to be exploring over the course of this 8 weeks. And he just really resonated with me because he obviously had a very deep practice, but he wasn't hippy dippy trippy. And that's just not my style. He speaks about this practice and presents the techniques like in a progressive and skill-based way. We talk about this practice as the cultivation of three primary skills: clarity, sensitivity, and equanimity. I'll speak more about that later. But for me, the approach to the practice is the cultivation of a skill set. It really resonates with me. Um, I've heard instructors and their guided meditation and their general approach. It's too airy, it's too fluffy, it's too formless. For me, I'm the kind of individual that really wants to uh, be specific about things and be technical about things. And that's what I found in this system, Unified Mindfulness. And that's why I really study and practice with Shinzen as often as I can. Over the course of 10 years, I've done many meditation retreats, traditional meditation retreats, silent days of practice. The first time I went on a meditation retreat was maybe 8 years ago or something like that, and it was for 3 days. And at the time, that was very scary and challenging and intense. So three days of not talking and just meditating from sun up till sundown. It was scary. I'd never done anything like that before. And since then, I've done many more retreats for much longer periods of time. So let that show you that allowing this practice to bear fruit, motivation comes. For example, a 3 day retreat was not necessarily enjoyable. It was challenging and mostly boring, but something indescribable just shifted. I noticed as life unfolded when I came back from the experience. There was no specific moment where the clouds opened and the sun came down and everything was illuminated. That didn't happen. That's not been my experience. However, with practice, with continued practice over the course of time, life just seems to unfold differently. There's more space, there's more opportunity for tranquility. Um, so I say this to encourage you in your practice because over the course of this 8 weeks, no doubt there's going to be days where you just don't feel like doing this, or you'll have a 10-minute period of practice and it feels like this is kind of a drag. I was mostly frustrated and bored. We have to look at this practice in the long game. Every time you sit, you're making subtle improvements in those three primary skills: concentration, clarity, and equanimity. And over the course of time, there are noticeable shifts. It's just a lot like exercise. I used to work as a fitness professional, so I often use the analogy there. Getting fit doesn't happen over the course of one workout or even 10 workouts. But if you make the concerted effort to get to the gym or whatever exercise you choose 3 4 days a week over the course of a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, you're going to be radically different. So that's how we need to approach the meditation practice. um, I mentioned some of the benefits. Well-being, emotional intelligence is huge. um, for me personally, one of the biggest areas of liberation that I've experienced in this practice is preventing the mind from generating afflictive emotions. Let me unpack that sentence for you. Has anyone, by show of hands, ever noticed that you can think your way into some pretty shitty feelings? Right. Feelings that have absolutely nothing to do with what's happening in reality, just totally fabricated by the mind. So you can stop your mind from doing that. Uh, Furthermore, you can train your mind to cultivate afflictive emotional states. You know, that's available to us. Through this practice, we start to recognize that, I mean, it's in our languaging, your mind, my mind. There's a distinction between what you are and the habits of the mind. And through the practice of meditation, we start to cultivate what they call metacognitive capacity, this ability to have a bird's eye view of what's happening in the moment. And from that place, we're now in an empowered position to make changes if changes are called for. Um, I will say, and a lot of the men on the call have heard me say this before, for me, what motivates my practice here is really to think of it like it's warrior's work. And that applies for the women as well. Um, the I use this phrase often, the hippy dippy trippy, never really spoke to my heart. I think we live in a society where the primary means of emotional regulation is distraction. There's always something to occupy your mind, to take you away from your experience of the present moment. And in the modern era, I think to turn toward that experience radically with no distraction, to sit still, close your eyes, and to be quiet is a revolutionary act. It really is warrior's work, and it's a subtle service because as you deepen in this practice, you cultivate a vibe, and that vibe is shared with everyone. You know, the more peaceful you become, the more quiet your mind, the more you're able to open your heart through this practice, the more you're able to see clearly your own traumas and let them go. That's a healing that is felt by everyone. So our primary responsibility, I really do feel, is to be as happy, as healthy as we can, because we're part of a collective. And for me, this practice is foundational to optimizing your health and your happiness. So I'm very happy to share it with you all. Um, so tonight we're going to be exploring a technique developed by Shinzen Young. And just before I forget, if anyone was so inclined, it may help you over the course of this 8 weeks to read his book, which is called The Science of Enlightenment. And that's available on Amazon. It's an amazing read. We'll be utilizing some of the techniques from the book. So if you were to read along, you might find it very interesting. Um, so like I said, the technique that we're going to be exploring this evening is called See, Hear, Feel. I'll talk a little bit about it before we begin the practice. So we could think of the totality of the sensing experience basically is the combination of 3 sense categories. Still with me? See, hear, and feel. Every sensory experience is a combination of those 3 things. You are walking down the street, you hear a car horn, you look, you see it, you have some memory of what happened, I don't know, last week, you wonder what's for lunch, you feel tension in your shoulder. See, hear, feel are the threads that are constantly intertwining to birth our experience of the present moment. It's not that esoteric if you think about it. And each of those 3 sense categories has an inner and an outer component to them. So right now, all our eyes are open. You're looking at the screen. This is the external visual field. But if everyone were to close your eyes for one moment and just allow yourself to soak into that space behind your eyes, could be a black screen or grayscale image, and just go ahead and project an image there. Just imagine something. Visualize something. You can open your eyes. So we see that there's external C space and there's internal C space. Similarly, if we look at here, our auditory experience, right now you can hear my voice. There's some sounds in the external space that you're aware of. But just like with C, there is also an internal component to that. So we would call this internal mental talk. So for many of us in the modern era, that non-stop voice that's always commenting on the present moment has become so normalized and hijacks our attention to such a degree that we're not really aware of that much else. I always like to say that there is an amusement park of sensations happening below the neck, but in the modern era, we live very much from the neck up. Internal mental talk tends to dominate a lot of our sensory experience. So just to get a feel for that, just for a moment, right now you hear my voice, external sound. And now just take a moment to repeat something internally. So we're all on the same page. You have a feel for what I'm talking about. Here occurs both externally and internally. And then we come to feel. So feel would be described as any sensory sensation in the body, any physical sensation. Right now, you may be aware of the clothing on your skin, the temperature in your room, an itch, tension in your shoulder. The list goes on and on. This would be external feel space. Now, internal feel space, we would call as the arising of any detectable emotion. So we would describe emotion as a physical sensation that plays out on the inside of the body. So I just wanted to make that point that see, hear, and feel both have internal and external components. And this will all become much clearer as we actually drop into the practice. I don't want to talk too much because I think I'll just tend to confuse you. Much better that we engage the practice, and then you'll really be able to feel what I'm talking about. But before we do that, one more thing I'll mention is just like each sense category has an inner and an outer component, each sense category also has an active and a restful component. What do I mean by that? So it is helpful to think of these sense categories spatially. That is to say, as if they were rooms that your attention wanders into. When we begin the practice, you're just going to allow your attention to wander onto whatever experience it may wander into. That could be a sound, it could be an internal image, it could be an external feeling. But sometimes you might notice that your attention seems to be guided to one of those three categories, even though nothing's really happening there. That would be called a restful state. So if you're suddenly aware of external sound, you're aware of the space of external sound, but no sound is actually happening, that would be called a restful state. If you're suddenly aware of internal mental talk space, but there is no internal mental talk, that would be a restful state. I'm afraid I may have said too much and confused the group. I hope that's not the case. So let's begin a very brief period of the guided practice so that everyone has a better idea of what I'm blabbing about. So we're just going to practice for just about a minute or two so everyone has a feel for what I'm trying to describe. Sound good? So I'll ask you to go ahead and close your eyes for now. And because this is an introductory class, I will speak for a moment just about posture. So in finding the proper meditation posture, we want to be just that middle point between rigid and totally relaxed. We don't want to be tight, though we don't want to slouch. Just find a comfortable position. Best that the spine is upright and the chin is tucked slightly. You can arrange your hands any way you like. And now with the eyes closed for a moment, just going to begin to explore here space. So the instruction is simple. Just listen. Just for a moment, just listen. Allowing any physical sensations or auditory, visual sensations to just play out in the background and really just focus on sound. This is here space. You may notice that the mind is commenting on what's happening right now, internal mental talk. Just listen. And now just for a moment, letting that go. feeling the body. Any available physical sensation whatsoever. Just feel. You may notice the feeling of your hands. You may notice the rhythm of your breath as a physical sensation. Internally, you may be able to detect an emotion. And now bringing your attention with eyes closed to internal C space, that visual screen at the eyes or just behind the eyes. It may be black, it may be gray, you may detect some oscillating shapes. It's all good. Just see. And now you could open your eyes and just allow the eyes to wander. Just for a moment, allowing the eyes to move around, soaking into external visual space. And letting that practice go. Just a little warm up for us. So I wanted everyone to have a feel for what I'm talking about. When we engage the practice, we'll be allowing our attention basically just to wander as it will, back and forth between those 3 sense categories and 6 possibilities. See in or see out, hear in or hear out, feel in or feel out. This would be described as an open awareness practice. So there's no restriction on your awareness whatsoever. The only instruction is to notice where your attention goes. Now, to keep our minds engaged in the practice, we are going to use internal labels. Those labels are just the words see, hear, or feel. So if I'm in the practice, and let's say my eyes are open, and I notice that my attention is drawn toward the orchid here in the peripheral vision. I say see. Suddenly I notice the humming of my computer, my laptop here. And my attention is drawn toward the physical sensation here of these earbuds in my ear. Feel. I notice that the temperature is a little warm. Feel. A car passes by here. Does everyone have an idea for what I'm talking about? Now, there's no need for you in the practice to, like I was explaining what my attention was drawn toward. The only thing you need to say is see, hear, or feel. It does help to kind of cultivate a rhythmic noting strategy. Nice, slow, and steady pace is good. You will not be able to note everything that arises and passes, so don't be overwhelmed. Just do your best to stay in the moment, stay in the practice. Before we begin the practice, I would love to know if anyone has a question about what I've said so far. So the first hand I saw go up was from Michael Holt, but that's definitely not your name. You're wearing, yeah, you have a maroon shirt on and there's a bunch of books behind you, sir.
Yeah, it's Shamim. I don't know how.
It was my mistake, actually. Don't worry, Shamim. What's your question?
My question is, So when you say feeling out,
Mm-hmm.
does it include feeling the space or feeling the things around you, or is just like the physical sensation that on your skin and on your body?
I want to make sure I understand your question. How exactly do you mean feel the things around you?
Like when you close my eyes, sometimes I can feel the space, feel the room, feel like I've been practicing feeling
Mm-hmm.
with attention, like uh, space around me, 100 yards, 1,000 yards, like all across the space around me. I've been doing a separate practice for that.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
I don't know how is that kind of the same thing of feeling out? Because I know feeling is the emotions, but
Yeah. So as you're aware of the space around you, is that awareness coming through a physical sensation?
yeah,
Yeah. Well, then the proper label there would be feel. Now, there's no instruction to note feel in or feel out. If it's an emotion, it's feel. If it's physical, it's feel. No need to differentiate between the two. The same goes for see and hear. Do you know what I mean by that? That's a great question. And it's actually great that you have an existing practice, because what you'll find is these techniques really sit well on top of any existing practice. And the real utility of this practice, this technique in particular, see, hear, feel, is it opens the opportunity for anything to become practice in meditation. So we don't need to go away into the mountain where everyone is quiet and we can't be disturbed to meditate. We can use a passing bus. We can use an itch. We can use our own monkey mind as a vehicle to cultivate concentration, clarity, and equanimity, and be happier and healthier. So thank you for that question. Cara, do you have a question? I think you're muted. You'll need to unmute yourself.
Excellent. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I haven't been writing notes, but I would like, perhaps if you could clarify your thoughts and feelings around the word equanimity.
Yeah,
What is my perspective of that term? How should I adopt it?
sure. Great question. So my intention was to talk about concentration, clarity, and equanimity after we do the practice, because very likely you'll all have the direct experience of those three things. But I will
Cool.
briefly say that equanimity, if you've never heard the word before, um, it could be thought of as a middle ground between clinging and aversion, as a
Ah,
third option between wanting and not wanting, of really just allowing the moment to be the way it is.
mm,
If it's
thank you.
pleasant, there's no clinging to how pleasant it is. If it's difficult, you soak into difficulty. And if it's neutral or boring, you just say, okay, this is the way it is. So this is a skill that we learn on the meditation cushion. And it starts with something as mundane as, let's say your nose is itchy, but you've made the commitment not to scratch it, and it's a little uncomfortable. But that could be thought of as a rep of equanimity. So you've just done a rep. So now when something happens in life, inevitably things are going to happen in life that aren't ideal. And our capacity to be at peace with the way things are is a very useful skill, because no doubt life is going to hand us difficult situations. The
Mm,
flip side of that coin is life is also going to hand us beautiful situations that they don't last forever. So the skill of equanimity gives us the capacity to be fully available for what's happening. We can soak
okay.
fully and deeply into the beautiful bits, and we can be fully available for the challenging moments without needing it to be different.
Thank you.
And I'm sure you'll have an experience of that just in this 10-minute practice. So I just want to make sure everyone's clear before we head into the practice. Does anyone else have any questions or comments? Okay, beautiful. So I hope I've explained everything clearly. Let's give it a shot. You can close your eyes. If you prefer, it's totally okay to leave your eyes open. And it's okay if to open your eyes at any point throughout the practice. Once again, this is a practice in open awareness. We are allowing attention just to wander as it will. The instruction is to notice where your attention lands, to focus on that sensory arising for one moment, and to categorize it: see, hear, or feel. I'll do a little out loud so you have a really clear picture of what I'm talking about. Hear, feel, feel, see, see, feel, 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 feel. You get the idea. Just allow your attention to go where it will and notice where it lands. If you notice that your attention has been hijacked by a thought, that's totally okay. It's inevitable. Just notice that that happened and guide the mind back to the practice. You may find your attention drawn toward the sensation of the breath. That would be a physical sensation, labeled feel. You may find your attention being drawn toward the same sensory arising over and over, perhaps the feeling of your hands or an external sound. That's totally okay. Just continuously label here, here, here. Whatever is happening is grist for the mill, an opportunity to practice. You may feel impatient or frustrated. Just soak into that feeling. Notice it. Label it. Let it come and go. Again, you may notice the mind has wandered into thinking. If that's the case, just notice that happen and guide the mind back to the technique. See, hear, feel. And now letting go of the practice. Letting go of the labeling and letting go of any technique whatsoever. And just for one moment, just allowing the mind to abide in this expansive state of choiceless awareness. Nothing to do, nowhere to go, no one to become. Just this moment. And when you're ready, allow the eyes to open. Well done. So I'd love to hear if anyone has any observations or epiphanies or questions.
I do have a question.
Please, what is your name?
This is Ariadna.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you for that guided meditation. That was really helpful. When I'm thinking, do I just label it hearing? Like that's my internal chatter, just hearing.
Precisely. That's
okay.
Exactly right.
And when the minds wander, I just label it hearing, and then I keep saying hearing, hearing, hearing until like the chatter slows down or stops.
Yeah, and it may not stop. The label I prefer to use is hear, not hearing, but that's just me. But yeah, there's no instruction to stop thinking. And in my experience, that's not really possible. What is possible is to develop some distance between the thinking mind and you, awareness. And notice that that thinking is not you, but it's an activity. And just that consistent effort of just noticing that the mind is thinking and labeling it begins to just create some space, a little bit of space between you and that chatter. And it may seem subtle now, just having done this practice for 10 minutes, but one of the phrases my teacher always uses is subtle is significant. And over the course of time with consistent practice, you can develop a new relationship to that chattering mind. But you reported it perfectly. You noticed that attention was drawn towards some thought, what's for lunch tomorrow, whatever, and you just labeled here. That's it. You did it exactly right.
Thank you. And I don't make any distinction between the internal stuff versus the external stuff. It's just hear,
Precisely.
See, feel.
Exactly. So you hear, you notice that the mind is thinking, here. You hear a bus go by outside, here. It's just sound. Just one is happening internally and one is happening externally.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Well done. Someone else? Anders.
Hi.
Hi.
What is your opinion on sitting up versus lying down in meditation?
Yeah, either are totally cool. Absolutely. The only thing you need to worry about or look out for with laying down is drowsiness. But if you find that you're not getting sleepy, then lying down is fine. And what we'll be exploring over this course of 8 weeks is I kind of want to turn this idea that meditation is something you need to do full lotus, sitting like this. No. There's going to be times where we're actually bringing this practice into life. So you can be running a meditative technique while you're driving to the office, while you're in dialogue with a loved one, while you're at the gym. Meditation is just the training of attention, and it's bringing the totality of your attentional resources to a given stimulus for a amount of time that you've decided. So we can do that anytime, any place, anywhere. Sitting up, laying down, walking, running, making love. So my answer to your question is whatever you prefer. Does anyone have a question or an observation about the technique? I want to make sure that you guys, Omji, talk to me. You have to unmute yourself, my friend. You're muted. I got you. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. You'll have to circle back to me on that one, Omji. Someone else.
I noticed that just by labeling the sound, it brought my attention back to the present moment. So each time I labeled like a thought, something I heard, it brought my focus back to being the present moment.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's one of the skills that I mentioned earlier on. It's concentration. That capacity to constantly come back to the present moment and notice the sensory arising of the present moment. Every time you come back, that's one repetition of concentration. And over the course of time, just like bicep curls, the more you come back to the present moment, the more concentrated you become. In Theravada Buddhism, that is called karnika samadhi, momentary concentration. So one way to cultivate concentration is to just focus on your breath, or focus on a candle flame, or pick one thing and really just focus on it. What we're doing in this practice is focusing on everything that comes up the moment it comes up. So the moment something comes up, our attention grabs it, we bring the totality of our focus to it for a moment, and then let it go and then focus on the next thing. But we're still training concentration because we're focusing moment by moment with intensity on every single thing that arises. We're allowing the mind to just go wherever it wants, but we're noticing where it goes. So in this way, we're cultivating the skill of concentration. So that's what you just described. The other skill, I did speak a little bit about equanimity. I just mentioned concentration. And the third one that I mentioned is clarity. So I'll talk a little bit about clarity. Clarity would be described as the skill or capacity to really have a moment by moment visceral experience of the sensing experience at a very deep level. To be very sensitive to what is happening moment by moment, inside of you and outside of you. The upside of that is, as clarity deepens, there's a tranquility. Anything that's arising becomes the opportunity to soak into. Furthermore, one of the things I've heard my teacher say is, we have 0.3 of a second before the terrorists take the building. Meaning, sometimes we cultivate these habitual processes that are not skillful, and they happen quite automatically. And if we're not practicing clarity, the body-mind might suggest that we take a course of action that's not skillful. Has anyone ever said something and immediately regretted it? Has anyone ever gone all the way through a pint of ice cream and just been like, oh shit, that was a mistake? So a lot of times we're being motivated by emotions, let's say, that are happening beneath the surface level of our awareness because we're not cultivating clarity. So just because we can't feel these things doesn't mean that we're not being puppeted by them and they are dictating our course of action in the world. And the degree to which we're unconscious of them is usually the degree to which those actions are unskillful. So a big part of this practice is becoming sensitive. And I don't mean that in the hippy dippy way. I mean just feeling fully what's happening here and now. And that's not always pleasant. You know, this practice is not all unicorns and rainbows. However, it is very important to turn toward the things that we've been successfully distracting ourselves from, because there's a liberation there and a purification there. And the more that we can feel fully and allow those wounds to move through us and be free of them, again, so freer is the cosmos. So like I said before, our responsibility is to be as happy and healthy as we can, And that's our gift to the collective. And this practice is foundational to offering that gift. So before I proceed, does anyone else have any question, confusion, anything at all they would like to mention about the practice? My man James from Australia, talk to me. Looking cool with those shades on.
Thanks, man. My eyes are open, by the way.
Cool.
I just had one question, because I was aware that I went into the mantra at one stage that I have practiced over many years.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my understanding, that's here,
Mm-hmm.
but in my understanding, I'm actually not hearing in that moment. It's actually the mantra is working in itself, the reverb or that echo or whatever it is. But I suppose my question is, what is that? That is here,
Mm-hmm.
but is it? Yeah,
that is here. And the mantra practice is a very common practice in meditation, and it's totally okay. And it's good that you have that practice. Any mantra is cultivating concentration for sure, because you're noticing if the mind wanders from it, and you're bringing the mind back to the repetition of that mantra constantly. So that practice, the see, hear, feel practice, can sit right on top of your mantra practice very seamlessly. As you repeat that mantra, yes, you are here. That would be here in. The upside of the see, exactly. It's
so
internal.
Is that third eye you talked about earlier, awareness?
Sure.
That it is here in
absolutely
the mantra. Yeah, cool.
A mantra in this unified mindfulness system would be called internal mental talk. And you can totally utilize internal mental talk to cultivate concentration, clarity, and equanimity, which is what you learn to do with the mantra practice. The difference here is that in a mantra practice, you're restricting your attention to stay with the repetition of that mantra.
Mm.
In this technique that we shared tonight, we're allowing the mind to wander where it wants. We're just noticing where it goes and labeling.
Right.
The upside here is that we can bring this practice into life, and anything that's happening becomes an opportunity to practice.
Right on.
Sound good?
Sounds good.
Good question. I'm glad you asked that. So we are coming up to 8 o'clock. I do want to say that this class, you have homework, and it's important that you actually do it. What I really want for you all, whether you're brand new to this practice or you have an existing practice, is to make the effort to come to your practice every single day for 8 weeks. At the end of 8 weeks, you will be in a very informed position as to whether or not this practice is useful. I feel very confident that you will make the decision that it is useful. And if you don't come to that decision, I will refund your tuition for this class 100%. Just kidding. Obviously, it's a free class. Your assignment for this week is to implement the see, hear, feel technique in a formal period of meditation, sitting meditation, for 10 minutes. 10 minutes a day, starting tomorrow. So I will say a few things about a daily practice, bearing in mind that it is nearly 8 o'clock and I'm a stickler for punctuality. If you don't have a daily practice already, it's a really good idea to cultivate a dedicated space in your home that will be your meditation spot. Okay? It could just be a chair in the dining room. Or you might want to go all out and build yourself a little altar with some flowers and some things that are important to you. It's just very helpful to have a spot that is your meditation spot. It helps to build consistency in the practice. Another thing to help build consistency in the practice is choosing a time of day that'll be your meditation time and just trying to stick to that time throughout. So for me personally, I like to do my practice in the morning and the evening. For you, you might be an early bird, so the morning works, or you might not. You may have young children. It doesn't really matter when. There's no optimal time during the day. It's just pick a time that works for you and stick to that time. The last thing I'll mention, if you don't know, there's an app you can get on your phone called Insight Timer, which is a very useful tool as a meditation timer. So if you were just use the alarm on your phone, you're going to get jarred out of your meditation period with some buzzing. It's not so nice. Insight timer is free, and you can come out of your meditation with a very nice, pleasant gong or a bell or wooden block. It's very useful. I've used it every day for a number of years, and I recommend it. So it is 8 o'clock. We're at the end of our line. If anyone has questions that they didn't ask or something comes up later, you all have my email, and drop me a line. I'll do my best to get back to you. But everyone remember, you have 10 minutes a day assignment, see, hear, feel, and we will meet again a week from tonight. Thank you all for your practice, and I thank you for being here. Good evening.